so this is chapter 2 of Zodiac, but I do apologize, this is going to be a long haul for me compared to other chapters and books that I normally post on my channel, so if I do drink a gulp of water in the middle, I do apologize, but I wanted to give you the entirety of chapter 2 because I feel like it's important, and the author broke it up this way for a reason, so I don't want to like mess with what they have. So this is chapter 2, Darlene Ferrin. Saturday, December 21st, 1968. This is scary. I knew the 2 kids who were killed on Lake Herman Road, confided Darlene Ferrin to her coworker Bobby Ramos. You did? Asked Bobby. Yeah, I'm not going up there again, Darlene said to her with a shiver. I was standing at the counter talking to her, Bobby told me later. I can remember part just plain. She was saying, you know, it gives me an eerie feeling. She knew them either from Hogan High School. I don't know how close she knew them, but she knew who they were, more so the girl. Hogan High School was just over a block from Betty Lou Jensen's home. Darlene had been a student there. Every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night, Bobby Ramos worked with Darlene until 3 in the morning at Terry's restaurant on Magazine Street in Vallejo. One thing about Darlene, Bobby recalled later, she talked to everyone. I used to tell her, don't talk to everybody. Everybody's not your friend. You just think they are. She was so friendly, people waited in line to get in her section. Darlene had braces on, 22, and she wears braces. She looked more like 17, acted 17. She had a Cupid doll look, braces on, short blonde hair, the type you want to take home. Darlene weighed 130 pounds and was 5 feet 5 inches tall with light brown hair and a penetrating blue gaze. Photos of her taken 5 years earlier when she was 16 showed a remarkable resemblance to Betty Lou Jensen. When she didn't put her eyeglasses on, she wore false lashes. She used to buy them by the dozen for us, said Bobby. Darlene was happy, laughing, joking, outgoing, not shy, talkative. She didn't mind meeting new people, new friends. Darlene, her second husband, Dean, and their baby girl, Dina, lived at 560 Walnuts in a building owned by Bill and Carmela Lee, Dean's bosses at Caesar Palace Italian restaurant where he worked as an assistant cook. Wednesday, February 26, 1969. Karen, Darlene's 17-year-old babysitter, went to the front window and looked out onto Wallace Street. The car had been there since 10 p.m., and she was sure the man inside was watching the Ferrins' ground-level apartment. The car was an American-made sedan, white-colored with a large windshield, but it was so dark out that she couldn't read the license number, even though the car was parked only about 8 feet away. The glow of a match flickered inside the car. The man in it lit a cigarette, and Karen got a partial look at him. He was heavy-set, with a round face and curly, wavy, dark brown hair. She thought he was middle-aged. Karen was so distressed that she went into baby Dina's room and stayed close to her crib until Dean got home from work. Karen went to the window, debating whether to tell Dean about the stranger, but decided against it when she saw the white car was gone. Thursday, February 27, 1969. Darlene was in the bathroom putting on her makeup to go out when Karen told her about the stranger. What did the car look like? Darlene asked. Karen told her. I guess he's checking up on me again. I heard he was back from out of state. Darlene paused. He doesn't want anyone to know what I saw him do, she said. I saw him murder someone. Darlene mentioned a man's name, a short, common name, but Karen didn't hear her. She was too intent on the fact that Darlene was obviously frightened of this stranger. When Darlene dropped by Terry's restaurant that night, she was told the stalking man had been asking questions about her. Saturday, March 15th, 1969. Pam Susan, Darlene's younger sister, had previously found 2 packages on the doorstep of the Ferrins' home, but she had never seen who'd left them. However, today she opened the front door in time to see a man in horn-rimmed glasses delivering a 3rd package. She had seen him before, parked in front of the house in a white car. And he told me, Pam remembered, that under no circumstances was I to look in that package. He stayed outside the door. He stayed outside in his car for the longest time after he delivered the package. When Darlene came home, she asked if anything had come for her. I gave her the package, and she took it into the back room, and when I asked her what it was, she didn't say anything. From that point on, she seemed different. She was real nervous, and she took the phone in her bedroom and made a phone call, and then she rushed me out, and she took me home real fast. Pam was finally able to learn that the first package contained a silver belt and purse from Mexico, and the second package, white and blue flower print fabric. Darlene planned to use this fabric to make a jumpsuit. Bobby Ramos thought that Darlene's ex-husband Jim was in Mexico and had sent the first 2 packages through a man he met there. Jim had married Darlene in January 1966 under an assumed name Phillips, 5 months after his discharge from the San Francisco Army Presidio. Honest to God, Darlene was petrified of him, Bobby told me later. A co-worker of Darlene's at the phone company in San Francisco, Bobby Oxham, recalled, Darlene was leery of Jim. She wouldn't be in the same room with him by herself. One of the reasons we kicked them out of our apartment was because Jim had a gun, a .22, and we didn't want that. Friday, May 9th, 1969, Darlene and Dean purchased a small house at 1300 Virginia Street next to Valito's Sheriff Office for $9,500. Saturday, May 24th, 1969. It was the painting party that finally introduced Karen to stop babysitting for Darlene. Darlene had most of her new friends over to the Virginia Street house to help her clean it up, and Karen stayed with Dina. 3 young men arrived who were so strange that they made Karen uncomfortable, and so she left the house. 2, she had grown tired of covering up for Darlene's running around with other men, a guilt that had preyed on her mind for the last 5 months. Darlene's younger rebellious brother, Leo Sunan, was at the party, as well as the Magoo twins, Mike and David, close friends of Darlene who outdid themselves trying to do her favors. The other guests were Jay Eisen, Ron Allen, Rick Crabtree, Paul the bartender, not his real name, Richard Hoffman, Steve Bolido, and Howard Buzz Gordon, the latter 3 Valito cops. The only other woman there was Darlene's friend Sydney. Darlene called her sister Linda Del Bueno about noon and asked her to come over. It was Linda who had first pointed out Darlene's increasing nervousness and physical degradation. Darlene would not admit to any problems. Dean saw no change in his wife. While Linda was on her way over, another guest, a stalking man, arrived at Darlene's new house. At the painting party, Linda told me later, she was so scared she begged me, "Just go, Linda, just go." This guy at the party had no business being at her house, and she told me to stay away from him. He was the only one dressed neat. Everyone else had old jeans on and was painting. I can see his face with my eyes open. I can see him with my eyes closed. I remember him from later at Terry's, and I remember him at the painting party, and Darlene was scared to death. She didn't expect him to show up. I can see him sitting there in the chair. The dark-rimmed glasses, the hair curly, wavy, an older type man. He didn't have the dark-rimmed glasses like Superman. He did have the dark-rimmed glasses like Superman wears. Overweight, he was 5 feet 8 inches tall or so. Of course, he was sitting down most of the time. I remember going in a little bedroom with Darlene, and I asked, "Darlene, what's wrong with you?" She was so nervous. The sky was scaring the heck out of her. I mean, she couldn't eat. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't being the Darlene I knew. Something was bothering her. When I showed up, he was already there, and Darlene begged me, "Linda, don't go near him. Just don't talk to him." "Well, who is he?" "Don't talk to him," insisted Darlene. She didn't want me to have anything to do with him. She asked me to leave because she didn't want him to know any part of the family. It was real strange. I thought about that, but then I went to Texas on my birthday in June. Pam, Darlene's younger sister, arrived at the painting party shortly after Linda left. I remember seeing this man leave a package on the doorstep at Wallace Street, she recalled for me. And I remember seeing him at the painting party. He liked to talk to me because I'm always a pretty honest person. Darlene got upset with me because she thought I was telling him too much. Well, he would ask me something. Darlene said, "Pam, I'm going to stop asking you to my parties if you don't stop talking to him." I said, "I thought you were dating this guy the way he talks." He was a very well-dressed guy with glasses. He had dark hair. He had a wart on his thumb. For some reason, I think Darlene met this man in the Virgin Islands. She mentioned a little bit about drugs. Groups of people constantly went into the bedroom all the time. I was never allowed back there. Someone mentioned something to the effect that somebody had been following Darlene, and Darlene changed the subject and said, "Don't worry about it. Nobody's going to hurt me." She was one of the most trusting people I've ever seen. I would have been scared to death if I had known someone was. I said, "Darlene, aren't you scared?" She said, "Nobody's going to do anything." When Pam left the party, there were still 14 people left and more coming. Some of these guests overheard the well-dressed man badgering Darlene about her sources of income. The stranger had a short common nickname. Pam thought it was Bob. This name has been changed. Sunday, June 22nd, 1969. Linda had just gotten back from Texas and wanted to tell Darlene how her relatives were, so early in the morning, she and her dad, Leo, went to Terry's restaurant. When I walked into Terry's this one particular day with my dad, the man from the party was sitting there and he was watching Darlene all the time, Linda told me with a shudder. He was constantly watching her, and as I walked in, he held the paper up over his face because he noticed me. The stranger gave Linda a cold stare and then went over to Darlene, saying something to her and then leaving. Linda told her father about the man. My dad said, "Ain't no big thing." He didn't think anything of it. Pam saw the man too. He was sitting at Terry's. I sat next to him. I remember he was eating strawberry shortcake, and I remember Darlene was very nervous because I was sitting next to him. He was talking to me, and she was very nervous about the whole thing. She kept whispering to me to get away from him. He wore a leather jacket. He always smelled of leather, even the time he came to the house to deliver that package. He was the guy who was asking about her at work, prying into her finances. He was asking me about Darlene's little girl and what was her relationship with Dean. What did she do with her tips? And she's really got her head together, and I understand Dean never wants to watch the baby. I was there for 2.5 hours sitting at that counter, and he sat there the whole time eating strawberry shortcake. Darlene kept telling me to get away, but I didn't want to go home because Harvey, my husband, wasn't home. The man didn't wear his glasses all the time. He put them on when he looked at the clock. They were rimmed glasses, dark rims, black, so black, Pam concluded, and he drove his car with old California plates. This man's car was solid white. She was scared of somebody, Darlene's friend Bobby Oxman told me later. She had been scared for some time. It started right after the baby was born. Did she ever mention the name of the stranger, I asked. No, I wish I could say that she did. She would make a statement every once in a while that she was having trouble or she was terrified of the sky. She would never go into it in any sort of depth. Bobby Ramos recalled for me that about the beginning of June, Darlene told me of a man watching her. She told us about him again when we took her and her daughter to the Solano County Fair. She turned to her husband. Do you remember that guy in the white car that used to bother Darlene all the time, used to sit out in front of her house all the time, who drove her over here one day? Her husband didn't. He was 30 to 28 and not heavy. He wore glasses. It was real nice when Darlene and Dean first got married, Carmela Lee told the wife of Dean's boss, told me later. She was funny, and we used to laugh all the time, and then all of a sudden she went to work at Terry's after the baby was born, and then nobody saw her anymore. She was still funny and joking and laughing and giddy, but she didn't have time for anybody. She'd fly into the restaurant and be real excited because she was going somewhere, just letting her husband know she wouldn't be home when he got home. That rubbed me wrong because I didn't like her being super excited about her going out with a bunch of friends when she was married and had a baby. Carmela used to go over and keep Darlene company while she was pregnant, and after the little girl Dina was born, she would stop in and have a cup of coffee when she collected the rent on the apartment. I only knew her for probably 2 years, Carmela recalled wistfully. She was chubby and wore braces, and after she had the baby she was even chubbier, a very sloppy dresser. Then, all of a sudden, she started dressing real nice and lost a lot of weight and started fixing her hair, which I thought was great. But then, when that started, her relationship with her husband ended. She was just never home. She had a whole group of new friends, and I never hardly saw her. I never knew any of her friends or where she went. Our friendship kind of dwindled because she was never around, never home. Dean never knew where she was, and I never saw her because she was always gone. Everyone seemed to notice the change in Darlene, who was excitable and even more high-strung than before. She lost so much weight that people attributed her nervousness to diet pills. Darlene would talk so fast that she would mix up her words and run them together. Dean and her were kind of switchy at times, said Bobby Oxman. They had their problems, same as any newly married couple with a child. She was very much outgoing. She just liked being around people, and Dean didn't. I think that put a strain on their marriage at times. She was not a tramp. She was no angel, but she was not a tramp either. Carmela had often seen Darlene in good clothes, and one day commented on a beautiful halter top with a blouse over it. Oh, I bought this at James Sears, said Darlene. Shoot, Carmela thought. Here, I own my own business, and I can't even shop at James Sears. And that's how I knew where she got her clothes, Carmela said to me later. Now, where did she get the money? Dean never knew where she got the money to buy clothes from. He was only a cook and she was only a waitress. She would say that she got them on sale, but I know she used to buy them at James Sears, and that isn't a cheap store. So her husband didn't want to think of anything. It never crossed his mind that she was dealing in narcotics or something. He wouldn't think about it. He would say, it's just something she's got to get out of her system. She just turned 21. Among Darlene's friends, it was no secret that she had been dating other men, including policemen from the sheriff's office. She used to go to San Francisco a lot, Bobby Ramos recalled. That's one thing we knew too, because she used to tell her husband, you don't come home all excited and tell your husband, oh, I had so much fun. I met these guys in the city and we went to the beach and did this and did that. A lot of times she'd just go by herself, Bobby Oxman said later. She loved the surf area to think. She'd sit in the surf and watch the sun come up. I heard she didn't drive. What did she do? Take the bus? I asked. She drove. She drove without a license. She drove all the time. She was very capable. A lot of times she'd have a friend's car, Dean's boss's car. She said, distant from everyone, Darlene would come home almost at dawn when Dean was already asleep, creep under the covers, and with one leg out of bed rock herself quietly to sleep. By the time she awoke, Dean would have left for work. Darlene told her younger sister, Christina, there's going to be some big things happening in the next few days. Darlene said this in a very mysterious way, and it's really something big is going to happen. What? Asked Christina. I can't tell you yet, but you'll read about it in the paper. Christina had no idea what Darlene was talking about. That was really confusing, she told Carmela Lee. I don't know if it's narcotics or a murder or a party. Then, said Carmela, we thought Darlene knew something about a narcotics bust or something she heard from one of her policeman friends. Darlene never verbalized precisely what made her afraid of this man in the white car, Bobby Oxman later told me. He had something on her, but what he had, I don't know. I have a feeling it's connected with the Virgin Islands, but that's just a hunch. Jim and her got involved with the wrong people while they were there on their honeymoon. That's why they left so fast. Now, what kind of trouble, I can't say. The couple had hitched to St. Thomas and the Virgin Islands, panhandling, diving for shells, sleeping on the beach. Pam suspected that this was where Darlene had seen a murder. Friday, July 4th, 1969. At 3:45 p.m., Dean Farron reported for work at the Lee's Italian restaurant. 15 minutes later, Darlene called her friend Mike Magoo and made a date to go to the movies in San Francisco at 7:30 that evening. Mike and his twin brother David had first met Darlene at Terry's. Now this fellow, Mike, was a very peculiar fellow, Sergeant John Lynch said later. When he and his brother came to Valito, they went into the coffee shop and got to talking to Darlene. Apparently she was really outgoing, gregarious type person, and they told her a lie, that they were wanted in Chicago for a shooting or something like that, and I guess that's what intrigued her with the guy in the first place. Bobby Ramos also recalled that the twins gave Darlene a story about running away. One told her he was Warren Beatty, and the other said he was David Jansen. They gave her some kind of line and she believed everything. She just fell right in with the deception. You know, she thought if you had a problem, she had a problem. In reality, they were the sons of the owner of a local pest control agency. An intense rivalry developed between the twins over the affections of Darlene, and they often fought over driving her to work. Linda remembered. Both of these guys were jealous of Darlene. I want to do her washing. No, I do. Back and forth they fought over her. It was pathetic. The twins were green-eyed, black-haired, 6 feet 2 inches tall, and extremely thin. They would be 20 in October. Their father said that Darlene called the Magoo house often, as much as twice a day. At 4:30 p.m., Bill Leahy opened the doors of his restaurant at 80 14th Street. At 6 o'clock, Carmela, who was pregnant and hadn't been working, dropped by Caesar's to spend an hour or two. 30 minutes later, she looked up to see Darlene and her 15-year-old sister, Christina, come into the restaurant. Darlene was wearing a jumpsuit that zipped up in the front and had red, white, and blue stars all over it. They had come to see Dean on their way out to Mare Island for the 4th of July celebration and boat parade on the channel. Christina was runner-up in the Miss Firecracker competition, and they were to ride in the boat parade that night. Darlene went out to Mare Island to ride on one of the boats that was all lit up, Carmela told me later. All I know is that she came into the restaurant and said she knew some people that had a boat, and she was going to go down there too. What time will you be home? Asked Dean. I'm inviting some people from the restaurant over to our house for a little party. Oh, I'll be home around 10, said Darlene. We'll stop and get some fireworks, said Dean, and we'll be there about midnight. Okay. She was going to take off and go down to the boat parade and then get the fireworks, Carmela recalled. She was all excited. She had friends and didn't say who they were, only that she was going to ride in their boat. Dean was kind of worried that if she went off with her friend she might not come home, and he had already invited us all over. At 6:45, Darlene went into Terry's to tell Bobby about the party that was going to be held at her house. She just rattled on and on and on, Bobby Ramos told me. She stood right at the cash register, gave some rollers to Jane Rhodes to hold for her, and was talking about her sister winning Miss Firecracker, and she was going to have a party and she wanted me to come. Finally I said, okay. But Darlene knew I wouldn't be there, and then Harley, the manager, walked up. Get out of here and quit bothering my girls, he said. He wasn't mad. She used to do it all the time. When Darlene left at 7, she said, I'm going to come back to see you. An hour later, Mike received a call from Darlene saying that she had to spend some more time with Christina and would call or be by later. When Christina and Darlene returned from Mare Island, they went to Caesar's again, and at 10:15, Darlene called the sitter to see how things were. The sitter told her that one of her friends at Terry's had been trying to reach her. Darlene drove into Terry's parking lot at 10:30 and talked for about 10 minutes with her friend. As she and Christina were leaving, Darlene stopped and talked with an older man in a white car in the lot. Christina noticed the conversation between the two was strained, and she sensed tension in the air. Christina observed that the stranger's car was bigger and older than Darlene's 63 Corvair. Darlene said nothing about the man on the way to the Suen family home where she let Christina off. Darlene arrived at her new home on Virginia, and the sitter, Janet Lynn, met her at the door. She told Darlene an older-sounding man had been calling all evening, but wouldn't leave his name or any messages. He said he'd call back, said Janet. Darlene changed out of her star-spangled jumpsuit into a white and blue flower print jumpsuit, which had been made from the fabric that had been left in a package on her doorstep by the man in the white car. Darlene woke up Dina and began playing with her and explained to Janet and her friend Pamela that I'm having some friends over here for tonight for a little party. Darlene planned on taking the sitters home and then coming back to clean the house up. However, just as Darlene, carrying Dina, had the girls bundled up in the Corvair, the phone inside began to ring and she rushed to answer it. When she returned, she asked if the two girls would mind staying until around 12:15, and they agreed. Darlene explained, I have to go back out and get fireworks for the party. Darlene left immediately, taking Georgia Street East directly to Beechwood Avenue, where she made a left to Mike's house at 864 Beechwood, 4.5 blocks from the Jensen home. Mike lived just to the west of Hogan High. Betty Lou Jensen had lived just to the south. Darlene stopped in front of the house, turned off the engine, and waited. In a moment, Mike rushed out in such a hurry that he left all the lights blazing, the doors standing open, and the television playing. In the driver's seat, Darlene started the engine and gestured impatiently for Mike to get in. As the bronze Corvair pulled off, they were trailed immediately by a light-colored car that had been parked in the shadows of the tree-lined street. We're being followed, Mike said. Darlene sped off to Oakwood, took a right on Springs Road, and started out towards Columbus Parkway the same direction as Lake Harmon Road. It was 11:55 p.m. now. The car raced behind them at high speed. Darlene kept turning to lose the stranger. She began going down side streets, but the car behind followed closer and faster. Mike kept telling her, oh, no, go straight. Finally, Mike said, just go this way. With the other car in hot pursuit, they were being chased inexorably toward the outskirts of the city. Still, within the city limits and only 4 miles from downtown Toledo was Blue Rock Springs Golf Course, another well-known lover's lane, and this was where Darlene and Mike were being herded. Darlene nervously turned right into the parking lot. 72 feet from the entrance, she hit a log and stalled the engine. The parking lot was about 2 miles from the site of the Jensen Faraday murders almost 7 months before and was not nearly as secluded. The lot overlooked the golf course. To Darlene's extreme right was a grove of trees. Hers was the only car in the lot. The couple sat in the darkness only a moment when the other auto, similar in design to the Corvair, caught up with them in the lot, turned out its lights, and then parked 8 feet to their left. The front of the car was nearly even with the black bumper of Darlene's car. Mike thought the car might be a 58 or 59 Falcon, with old California plates. He could tell the driver was a man. "Do you know who it is?" whispered Mike. "Oh, never mind," said Darlene finally. "Don't worry about it." Mike didn't know if this meant she knew who it was or not. Almost immediately, the other car roared off at a high rate of speed, heading toward Valito. Mike breathed a sigh of relief. In 5 minutes, though, the car returned. Now it parked to their left, and to the rear of the Corvair with its lights on. Mike noticed the other car had pulled up behind them at sort of an off-line from their car, a cut-off technique used by highway patrolmen. Mike has been parked in the same lot once before, and a police officer had come up in the same manner. Suddenly, a bright and powerful light like a policeman's spotlight was beamed at them from within the other car. The lone occupant of the car threw open his door and, carrying a large flashlight extended in front of him, advanced towards the couple, all the while shining the glaring light from one face to the other. The light went out. It was a floating lantern with a handle of the type Mike had seen on boats. Thinking it was the police, Mike suggested to Darlene, "Here come the cops, you better get your identification out," and reached for his right rear pocket to get his wallet. Darlene took hers out of her purse and replaced the purse in the rear behind Mike's seat. The man strode to the passenger side of the car. The window was down. Without warning, the blinding light exploded on again directly into Mike's eyes. The stranger was invisible. Mike heard the clink of metal against the window frame, saw a muzzle flash and smoke erupt. The roar of the shot filled his ears. The bullet hit with tremendous heat, and Mike felt his blood flowing. Even though the shot seemed loud, Mike got the impression the gun had some sort of silencer on it. The man pumped more shots at the couple. Darlene slumped forward over the steering wheel, hit by bullets that had passed through Mike's body and by bullets aimed at her. She was wounded by 9 rounds. 2 bullets caught her in the right arm and 2 in the left arm. 5 bullets hit her in the right side of her back, piercing her lung and the left ventricle of her heart. Mike reached for the door handle, his fingers scrambling frantically, and to his horror realized that it had been removed. He was helpless, unable to get away from the fiendish killer shooting at him. The boy had been wounded in the right arm and was in terrible pain, while the attacker, without a word, turned and began walking away, his head down. Mike let out a low cry of agony. The gunman, in the process of opening his car door and doing something Mike could not make out, stopped in the still, silent summer night, turned slowly, and looked over the shoulder of his Navy-type windbreaker in Mike's direction. With his hand on the door handle, the stocky man's profile was illuminated by the interior light of his car, and for the first time, Mike saw the face of his attacker. The man appeared to have a large face and was not wearing glasses. He seemed to be between 26 and 30 years old, and had short, curly, light brown hair worn in a military-style crew cut. The man's build was beefy, heavy-set without being blubbery fat. Perhaps 195 to 200 pounds. Mike estimated that he was 1 head higher than Darlene's Corvair, about 5 feet 8 inches tall. His pants had pleats, but Mike could see that he had a slight pot belly. The intruder had stopped, looked back at Mike, and now was returning to finish the job. The stocky man leaned into the Corvair through the open window and fired 2 more shots at Mike. Mike kicked out with his legs in a pathetic attempt at self-defense. With nowhere else to go, he leaped backward into the rear of the auto, legs thrashing spasmodically. The man fired 2 more shots at Darlene, turned away, got into his car, and drove off just fast enough to make the gravel fly. Mike, badly wounded in the left leg, right arm, and neck, finally was able to regain the front seat. He opened the passenger door from the outside and toppled from the Corvair onto the parking lot. Blood rushed from the wound to his cheek and neck. The bullet had entered from the right and exited from his left cheek, ripping a hole through his jawbone and tongue. It felt like a sledgehammer had hit him, and when he tried to speak, he could only gurgle. He could not even call out for help. In the front seat, he could hear Darlene moan. at about midnight in his home, 800 feet from the Blue Rock Springs parking lot. George Bryant, the 22-year-old son of a course caretaker, was having trouble sleeping on such a hot night. George was in his bedroom on the second story of the house and lying on his stomach, peering out the window overlooking the park. He had gone to bed a half hour earlier and lay listening to people laughing in the distance and a few exploding fireworks. Suddenly George heard a gunshot, a short interval of silence, and then another gunshot, a short pause again, and then rapid fire. Soon he heard a car take off at super speed and burn rubber. The attacker's luck was holding. George could see most of the lot, but the spot where Darlene's car was stopped was hidden by trees. 3 teenagers, Deborah, Roger, and Jerry, were looking for a friend of Roger's. They had come to Blue Rock Springs after a day of celebrating the 4th in the downtown area of Vallejo. As they passed the main parking lot, they noticed Darlene's Corvair, and they thought to check to see if this was the missing friend. They decided it wasn't and were about to leave when they heard a muffled scream. Deborah backed the car up and turned it to shine the high beams on the Corvair. They saw a man rolling in agony on the ground. Deborah pulled up as close as she dared and stopped. All 3 teenagers ran up to the injured man. "Are you all right?" "I'm shot," Mike was finally able to get out. "And the girl's shot. Get a doc." "All right," said Jerry. "We'll get you one." "Hurry." Roger wanted to stay behind with Mike, but Deborah and Jerry urged him to come with them to Jerry's house to call the police. As the brown Rambler turned out of the lot and onto Columbus Parkway, the 3 teenagers thought they could see the red points of taillights disappearing down Lake Herman Road. Deborah called the police from Jerry's and told them what she had seen. As time went by, the 3 became anxious and went to Jerry's uncle, who was a policeman. The uncle checked and found a car had already been dispatched to the scene. The 4 then went to police headquarters. The Vallejo PD switchboard operator, Nancy Slover, had received a report from a female caller that 2 persons were shot at the east side of the main parking lot at Blue Rock Springs at 12:10 a.m. Detective Sergeant John Lynch and his partner, Sergeant Ed Rust, were in their car in plainclothes when the report came through. "I tell you the way this thing come down," Lynch told me later. "We worked Sonoma Boulevard and Tennessee Street, and we got a report there was gunshots out at Blue Rock Springs. I was driving the car and made a U-turn and started down Tennessee Street. I talked to Rust, and he says, 'It's the 4th of July, and there's kids out there shooting firecrackers.' So we kind of moved around and didn't roll on it. I guess about 10 minutes later we got the call there was a shooting out there. It's the one thing I felt really bad about, that we didn't roll right away on that call. If we had went right out Tennessee Street, that car would have passed us, because we came down Tennessee and he turned on Tuolumne. I don't think he made any turn on Lake Herman Road. I got to the scene 15 minutes after it happened." Rust and Lynch could see Darlene's Chevrolet on the east side of the lot pointed toward the park area. The car's head and taillights were on, the turn signal was flashing, and the passenger door was open. Officer Richard Hoffman and Sergeant Conaway were on the scene already, attempting to question Mike, who was bleeding badly from severe wounds in the neck, the chest and shoulder area, and the left leg. He was lying at the rear of the Corvair at right angles to it. Lynch called for an ambulance from Kaiser Hospital. "Magoo was in real great pain," Lynch said later. "To tell you the truth, when we got there, I don't think she was hit too hard. I thought Mike was the one he seemed to be in great pain from the hit in the knee." Lynch and Rust bent over Mike and noticed something weird. The boy was wearing 3 pairs of pants, 3 sweaters, a long-sleeved button shirt, and a t-shirt on a hot July 4th night. They could see Darlene was wearing a white and blue flowered outfit and blue shoes. Behind the wheel, she opened her eyes slightly. She still had her false eyelashes on. Lynch and Rust both knew who she was. Lots of cops knew her and used to stop in at the coffee shop out there where she worked. "I knew who Darlene was," said Lynch, "but I never talked to her. In fact, her family lives just down the street from my house. She liked to run in the ocean. She'd take her shoes and stockings off and just run through the surf. She dated a lot of officers. Apparently she was the type of person who liked policemen. When people work nights, usually those are the kind of people who like policemen." Lynch noticed that Mike's position on the ground had been carefully outlined with white chalk by Conway. Mike's eyes were wide, and he struggled to open his mouth to speak. When he finally did, blood gushed out. In halting words and between spasms of pain, he told Lynch, "A white man drove up in a car, got out, walked up to the car, shined flashlight inside, started shooting. I got out of car. I tried to get the people to come over, but they drive off. After finally 10 minutes, the policeman came." "Do you know who shot you?" asked Conway. "No." "Can you give me a description?" "Can't." "Try." "Young, heavy-set, in a light tan car." "Did he say anything?" "No, he just started shooting and kept shooting." Again, Lynch went to the driver's side of the Corvair, where Darlene was still behind the wheel. He could see she was wounded in the upper body and left arm and was still alive. She was making a soft moaning sound like the wind. "Where is that ambulance?" muttered Lynch. "I remember," he told me. "She was trying to say something, and I put my ear over her like this to try to understand, but I just couldn't. The words she said were either I or my. Her pulse was weak and her breathing shallow." Lynch got Darlene out and laid her on the ground. Rust noted that both windows on the left and right were rolled down and the ignition key was turned to on. The radio was on and the car was in low gear. Even the handbrake had not been set. He wondered about this. 7 shell casings were found a few feet away from the victims on the right side. Rust peered in from the right side and could see 3 bullet holes in Darlene, 2 in her upper right arm and 1 in her right side. When the ambulance arrived, Lynch helped the steward lift Darlene into the vehicle. Hoffman accompanied the victims to the hospital in case Darlene should be able to say something. Lynch had called out 3 fire trucks to illuminate the area with floodlights, while Rust checked out the area where Magoo had been lying. Approximately where the center of Mike's back had been, he found a copper jacketed slug, badly misshapen but recognizable as a 9mm or .38 caliber. There was no blood or skin on the slug. Russ bagged it and marked it. Now Russ checked the place where Darlene had been slumped behind the wheel and found another slug, similar to the one under Mike but in better condition. He continued to inspect the inside of the car and found on the right rear floorboard 2 spent shell casings, brass, marked with a WW. They appeared to Rust to be a 9mm ammunition. Lynch himself was not overly familiar with guns. The inside of the Corvair was very bloody. Rust knelt down by the driver's side and, looking closely, found that a hole about 1/2 inch to 1 inch long had been made in the door handle area. He made a note for ID technician John Sparks to dig inside the door when the car was towed to the impound room at the Toledo PD. Russ noticed a man's black leather wallet on the right rear fender, where Hoffman had placed it. Russ looked through it and then in the glove compartment, where he found registration papers for the auto and the name of Arthur Farron, Dean's father. On the left rear floorboard, he discovered a woman's quilt-patterned purse tied with a leather drawstring and covered with blood. There was only 13 cents inside. Rust could hear the static of their car phone. Lynch went for it. It was Hoffman calling. Darlene was DOA at 12:38 a.m. At exactly 12:40, a man placed a call through an operator from a payphone to the Toledo PD. Switchboard operator Nancy Slover answered. "I want," said the man, "to report a double murder." There was no trace of accent in the voice, and it seemed to Nancy that the man was reading what he was saying, or had rehearsed it. "If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to the public park, you will find kids in a brown car." The stranger's voice was even and consistent, soft but forceful. Nancy tried to interrupt him to get more information, but he just talked louder, covering her voice. To her, the caller sounded mature. He did not stop talking until he had completed his statement to her. "They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." When he said goodbye, the man's voice deepened and became taunting. Nancy heard the sound of a receiver being replaced. She was left listening to the empty hum of the line. After he hung up, the killer must have stood for a minute in a lighted phone booth. Suddenly, the phone began to ring. A middle-aged black man in shabby clothes who was passing by looked over and saw the stalking man in the booth. Turning his head away, the killer opened the door of the phone booth, plunging it into darkness. To stop the phone from ringing, he unhooked it and let it hang. After a moment, he walked briskly off into the night. At 12:47, Pacific Telephone had traced the call to Jones Union Station at Tuolumne and Springs Road, located right in front of the Vallejo Sheriff's Office and within sight of Darlene and Dean's little green house on Virginia. The stalking man may have looked in the house as he passed it after making his call. Dean was still working at this time, so the only occupants were Dina and the babysitter and her friend. The police placed a call to Dean's father because the Corvair was registered in his name. Thus, his father learned of Darlene's death first. The police then tried to contact anyone at the Magoo residence by phone, and when this failed, they dispatched Officer Shrum and his partner to the Beechwood address. They got out of their squad car and approached the house carefully since the door was standing open and all the lights were blazing. Except for the blaring television, the two officers could hear no other sound in the building. They found the house empty. After locking up Caesars, the owners and help, including Dean, started west toward the Farrens' house on Virginia for the party. Bill Lee and Dean, in separate cars, stopped at Pete's liquor store and bought some liquor. After we closed the restaurant, Carmela remembered later, the waitresses and all of us got in our cars and we all went over to his house. When we arrived, there was a babysitter, two young girls Dean didn't know, never had seen before. They were daughters of a friend of Darlene's, which made it embarrassing for Dean. He felt a little funny. They were supposed to be taken home, but Darlene never came back. That's why we were wondering, well, where is she? What is she doing? The sitter said that Darlene had said she was going to get some fireworks. Dean left to find her. The phone rang at 1:30 and Bill Lee picked it up. All he could hear on the line was heavy breathing. Probably one of Darlene's goofy friends, he said to Carmela over his shoulder. Bill was gruff. Why doesn't she stay home with her husband once in a while? He said into the mouthpiece and hung up. A few minutes later, Dean's parents received a similar call and could hear only deep breathing or the wind on the end of the line. All they could tell was that someone was there. Dean's brother got a crank call next. Thus, there were 3 anonymous calls to relatives of Darlene less than an hour and a half after she was shot, long before any mention of the crime in the paper or on the radio. Darlene's own parents, the Sunnens, got no such calls. They had an unlisted number. Was the killer searching for a specific person to talk to? Was it Dean he wanted to taunt, and did he know the sound of his voice? Although Dean and Darlene kept the same phone number when they had moved to Virginia Street, they were listed in the book as still living on Wallance. If the killer had been a stranger, he would have assumed that he was calling a house many blocks away, yet he used a payphone within sight of the couple's new home. Finally, somewhere around 2 a.m., Darlene's husband came home. Janet, the sitter, told me later. He said, "I'll just take you home." He seemed worried or upset, like something was bothering him, something was on his mind. He said something like, "Darlene's not coming home yet," and then he just took us right home. Dean took the kids home right away, whatever time it was then, Carmela recalled. He was probably gone 10 minutes. We heard about the murder when the police came to the door. We were still there, hanging around. Yeah, we were all there wondering where Darlene was and where the fireworks were, and we were just kind of sitting around the room talking for about an hour when there was a knock at the door. And then the police came to the door, so my husband and Dean went to the police station, and as soon as they walked out of the door, one of the policemen came in the house and asked us some questions about where Dean had been earlier that night. I guess immediately the husband is suspect in a case like that. So we told him we all worked together and we all came over for a party and we were waiting for Darlene, and then we said, "What happened?" He told us she had been shot and was with another man. "Is she all right?" I asked him. He said, "No, she's dead." And boom, that shook it. It just upset everybody. He told us all, but Dean didn't know until he got to headquarters. The police questioned Dean and Lee for an hour, keeping as much information from them as possible. "We heard she had a boyfriend," the detective said to Dean. "Well, Dean never wanted to know that," Carmela said later. In fact, he didn't want to believe that. When she was going out all of the time, people would tell him, "Boy, you better find out who she's going out with." He used to say, "She's not doing anything wrong. She doesn't have a boyfriend. She's just young and has to get it out of her system." So he really did love her, and he used to protect her when people would tell him bad things about her. and after it was over, when he would hear bad things about her, he would clam up. He didn't know any more than any of us. The last year, he didn't even know her. Bill Lee told the police, "I don't know any reason anyone would want to kill Darlene." The official police report of Bill's questioning in room 28 at Vallejo PD reads as follows. William did state that he knew that she was running around a lot and thought she was seeing other men. Could not give names or dates, places of any of this. Stated she would go out and stay out until late night or early a.m. Stated some of William's friends had said they had seen Darlene in different places with other men. William stated Dean allowed her to go out, usually as she pleased, and would not believe she was doing anything wrong. William then stated he remembered a person known only as Paul, this name has been changed, who Dean had sold a 51 Ford pickup to. Stated he heard this Paul had tried several times to get Darlene to go out with him, and she would not, and this Paul became sarcastic, mean, and bitter about the fact she would not have anything to do with him. Williams stated he had never met this Paul as far as he knows and does not know where he lives or works. Has heard that he is a bartender. He heard that this Paul used to hang out around the bar, Jack's Hangout, that was next to Darlene's old place on Wallace, would come over when Darlene was home and pester her, trying to pick her up. Bobby Ramos found out about the shooting at midnight from Officer Howard Buzz Gordon, a mutual friend of Darlene and Bobby. He called me at work and told me he might have been at headquarters when the call came in, she told me later. At 2:30 a.m., Sergeant Rust arrived at Terry's to talk with Darlene's co-workers. Bobby Ramos was first. She had spent some evenings with Darlene at the Colorado Inn where she liked to dance. The only male friend of Darlene's that Bobby knew was Mike. After Darlene's death, Bobby moved from the more isolated working area of Terry's to the banquet room where she would see 200 people at a time. Rust then talked with Evelyn Olson, who claimed that she had been told by Darlene that her marriage was about at an end. Darlene thought her husband didn't love her anymore. She told me this around Christmas, and after she told me this, she began dating other men. Darlene had many boyfriends, but nothing serious, said Evelyn. Just past 3 a.m., Russ spoke with Louis McNee, the cook, who told him that although Darlene had many male friends, she seemed to stick mainly with Mike, and in fact, she knew of a trip to San Francisco the two had made within the last month. Harley Scaley, the manager, confirmed that Darlene ran around with several men. Darlene dated a lot of guys. I asked lunch later, and he replied, "Oh, all kinds of guys. She was a goer." But Bobby, Evelyn, and Lois all recalled one particular individual, a short, stocky man with black hair who kept trying to date Darlene. The man had a pink pickup and a brown car, possibly a Corvair, and would get uptight when Darlene wouldn't date him. He would become very bitter about this. The women did not know the man's last name, but they did know he was a bartender, and that his first name was Paul. At 3:30 a.m., Darlene's body was taken to Twin Chapels, and photos were made. I was pregnant at the time, Darlene's sister Linda remembered, and I went to the mortuary, and she was lying on the slab, and they said, "She's not finished yet," and I said, "I want to see her now." And I broke through. I had so much adrenaline in me. I broke through those doors and touched her, and I'll never forget that because it was like touching marble or a doll, and her hair was orange, and her mouth still had blood on it. They had sewed up her mouth, but it was still bloody. I kind of wish, in a way, I hadn't, but that's what I wanted to do, so I did it. Lynch was still out at Blue Rock Springs at 7 in the morning. We were searching for whatever we could find. Ed Cruz made an elaborate sketch of the whole area. They dug a perfect bullet out of the car, one that wasn't smashed. It probably went through the fleshy part of her body and then just had enough momentum to penetrate the upholstery, and they just dug that out. As the barrage of shots fired by the killer in the parking lot was recovered, the detectives found 9mm casings and 7 copper-jacketed 9mm slugs in various conditions. Since the killer had fired at least 9 shots and possibly as many as 13 without reloading, they believed the weapon would almost certainly be a Browning. Smith & Wesson did produce the M59 pistol, a 9mm Parabellum that operated on a modified Browning system and had a magazine capacity of 14 rounds. It had been marketed as a police sidearm. All other semi-automatics considered, Starr, Smith & Wesson, Austria, Lama, Neuhausen, Zabrafia, Husqvarna, Esperanza, and Parabellum, Luger, had only a magazine capacity of 8 or 7 bullets. The Browning 1935 high-power FNGP-35, manufactured in Canada by the John Illinge Company since World War II and used by the Canadian Army, holds 13 cartridges in a double-road staggered box magazine. Whew, that was a lot. Okay, Rust arrived at Blue Rock Springs with a still badly shaken Linda and her husband. Linda told Lynch that Darlene's 3 closest friends were Sue, Dean's cousin, and Bobby, the blonde at Terry's, and a man known as Bob, who used to bring Darlene presents from Tijuana. Linda also mentioned Paul. Paul tried to date Darlene, but she didn't like him particularly. He was a neat dresser, short, stocky, with dark hair, she said. He visited Darlene frequently. He was very emotional. Lynch spoke with Mike's father, who had stayed the night of the killing at Kent Wiggs Motel. He said that Darlene had called several times on Friday. As for Mike's twins, he had supposedly been living in LA for 4 to 5 weeks before Darlene's death, but there were conflicting claims to this. At 8:25 a.m., Mike was operated on. During the emergency surgery, his fractured jaw was wired and his left leg repaired with the use of 3 metal pins and protected with a full leg cast. 1 slug was removed from his thigh by the doctor. This was put in a glass bottle and delivered to Lynch. Most of the delicate surgical work was done on his arm because of some splintering. Mike's acute tongue injury still prevented him from being able to speak without great pain. At 9:30 a.m., John Sparks, the ID man, gave the Corvair a thorough going over in the police garage. At 11:15, Lynch and Rust went to the Sewin family home. Darlene's father, Leo, said that Darlene had no known enemies, but at times she appeared to be afraid of Magoo. Even though he was heavily sedated, Mike was finally interviewed from his hospital bed by Lynch. Carefully, Mike emphasized it was dark out and hard to see. In weak, halting words, he related to Lynch the events of the tragic 4th. Only one part of the story was altered. Darlene picked me up at 11:40, and since we were both hungry, we headed down Springs Road west toward Vallejo, but at Mr. Ed's we turned around at my suggestion and drove to Blue Rock Springs so we could talk. From a confidential report, I learned of another charge in Mike's story. Sue Ayers, a legal secretary, claimed she had talked to Mike in the hospital after the shooting, and he told her that Darlene and another man had an argument while he was present in Darlene's car at Terry's the night of the shooting, and that when they drove away, the stranger followed them to Blue Rock Springs, where the argument continued, and that they were shot by that man. Mike also told her that they followed, at least from the time she picked me up at my house. In subsequent interviews, Mike said the attacker wore a blue shirt or sweater, weighed about 160 pounds, and combed his hair up in kind of a pompadour and then back. The car was changed to a light tan Chevy. Darlene's sister, Pam, stated that Mike told her at the hospital that the guy came up and shot. He knew Darlene because he called her by name. She was known to her close friends as Dee, and he called her Dee. Why do you think Mike doesn't want to tell certain things to the police? I asked Pam later. Well, he was in love with Darlene, she suggested. Mike wrote her letters. When Darlene died, they found 3 letters from Mike, all signed by a different name. Mike liked to pretend to be different people. The police contacted the sitters and asked them to come down. They were very pushy, so definite. We'd say something and the policemen say, no, that couldn't be, until you just figured, no, it couldn't be. You don't argue when you're that young with a police officer. You know you're really young when you're 14. Janet told me some years later, It's really strange. They take you to a police station and you have nightmares for weeks afterward, but you try to remember everything. I have here, said Lynch, that Darlene came home at 11 and cleaned the house. No, said Janet, it was actually around 11:35. There was a big discrepancy, said Janet, between the police report and the time she really came home. They kept telling us that she had to be home at 11, and we kept telling them it was later. They didn't even bother to write it down. What time did you say she was murdered? Midnight. She didn't even leave until almost midnight, because we were watching a program that doesn't come on until almost midnight, and she was murdered like 5 minutes later. How could she get out there in 5 minutes? And she picked up somebody else too. We thought it was important. You can't get all the way out there that quick. A hot pursuit would explain the speed. As in the Lake Herman murders, there was no sexual molestation or robbery. In both cases, the killer had fired a fusillade of shots and had left behind no identifiable tire tracks or footprints. The slayer did possess a thorough knowledge of the geography of Vallejo. Was he a resident of Vallejo, perhaps a neighbor of Jensen or Faraday, and even a common friend of all the victims? Lynch contacted Lundbald, who compared both crimes and decided the phone call to the police was not a ruse. Lundbald spoke to the press and told of the similarities in the murders, but did not mention the call or elaborate on the evidence. A Vallejo policeman who had dated Darlene fell under suspicion, was cleared by Lynch, but eventually left the department. Sunday, July 6, 1969. At 12:02 a.m., Carmen, Mike's mother, arrived in Vallejo from Los Angeles. She and Mike's brother talked to Lynch. Darlene had no known enemies, said Mike's twin. A man and his son next phoned Lynch and told him that they had witnessed an argument between a man and a woman at Terry's parking lot around 10:30 p.m. on July 4th. The man was 30, about 6 feet tall, and weighed about 180 to 185. He had hair the color of champagne combed straight back. At 6:45 p.m., Lynch talked with the 3 teenagers who had come upon the murder. At 7 p.m., Darlene's father picked up Christina and the 2 sitters and took them to Darlene's house on Virginia, where they met Lynch and Rust. Out of 5 detectives, Lynch was assigned as chief investigator on the murder. He assessed every possible motive from jealousy to revenge, but none of these panned out. The nature of the sick phone call led the detective to concentrate his search for a maniac. She was a beautiful girl. I was at the autopsy. I had no days off at all. For a town like Vallejo, this was a real big deal, especially after those 2 other kids, Lynch said mournfully. Monday, July 7, 1969. The Corvair was returned, and Linda and her father had to move the car down the hill away from the house to clean it. It was all full of blood, said Linda, and there was Dina crying for her mother. It was heartbreaking. Dean brought all of Darlene's diaries, phone books, and papers to Lynch. He discovered a yellow photo envelope with strange words written on it. Dean was unable to explain what the writing might mean. The words hacked, stuck, testified, and seen were on the edge of the envelope in Darlene's handwriting. Lynch could make out a series of partial words as well. They made no sense to him. They were acqui, calc, and isio. In addition, she had circled the printed words on, by, and at, and scratched out the word highly. A phone number on the back proved to be that of Mr. Ed's restaurant and drive-in. There were other disturbing things for Lynch to think about. Darlene had left to get fireworks on the night of the 4th, and yet her sister said she had already bought them. When Darlene was found, she had neither fireworks nor the money to buy any. Only 13 cents was found in her purse. Seems to me, Lynch recalled, she drove over to Mike's house and told him they were going to have a fireworks display at her house, and she asked him to go with her so they could buy the fireworks. There were booths all over town. Tips to the police hinted that Darlene's murder involved narcotics, witchcraft from the Virgin Islands, and even a satanic church, a devil cult in Vallejo. I asked Linda about the witchcraft connection. Darlene was really into it even when she was 17. She believed in reincarnation and voodoo and stuff like that. The Virgin Islands, that's when she really got into it. Carmela later told me she was probably in an occult. She probably was mixed up with some goofy people only because she loved excitement. Her being married previously to the kind of guy she was, it could have been a lifestyle for her. Darlene mentioned the witchcraft angle to a certain degree, Pam related. Knowing this guy that was sitting at the counter up at Terry's, just the way he talked, the way he was into that skull with the dripping candle. Darlene said he was the one who kept it lit and talked about these weird things and witchcraft. But there was no ritual. Darlene's friends would just come over and tease, but the one who would start it all would be this guy, the man who delivered the package, the man at the painting party. I spoke with Bobby Oxman about the newspaper stories about Darlene and the drugs. The stories printed made a lot of us angry. She might have taken marijuana once in a while, but drugs were strictly taboo to her. I guess, Bobby Ramos explained to me. The police didn't ask me the right questions. All this talk of drugs turned me off. Darlene got into something I don't think she could have got out of, and she was afraid. So I think she did want to get out of it. And the killer said, well, I'll just do away with her because she'll probably just go to the police. However, Linda had her own theories. The money put on the new house, she said forcefully, none of it came from Dean. It came from whatever she was doing with this man in the white car. I was constantly, twice a week, taking her to the bank, Crocker Citizens on Georgia. And why was Mike wearing 3 pairs of pants and 3 shirts on a hot summer night? And what about the missing door handle? Dean stated that the inside passenger side door handle was always attached, and Christina said that it was attached when she left the car at the family home. But the most chilling and inexplicable thing was that after the couple had been found at Blue Rock Springs, after they were taken to the hospital, and after police had sealed off the area, the missing door handle on the front passenger side of the Corvair was mysteriously replaced. Spooky. Friday, July 11, 1969. Right now, Lynch was concentrating on the search for the bartender, Paul. He owned a 56 Chevy, blue over white, a red Pontiac, and the pickup he had purchased from Dean Farron. Paul would often have breakfast at Terry's at 2 a.m. after the bars closed. A source told Lynch that Paul was constantly bothering Darlene and had followed her many times. Darlene was deathly afraid of him and was friendly only in an effort to keep him at a distance. Lynch told me, Paul wasn't real aggressive, but he was the type of guy who was tough to put off, and he had been coming in there at the coffee shop bothering Darlene. It took us a week to find him. Finally, Lynch received a tip that the Paul they wanted to talk to was employed in a bar in Benicia. They got in touch with Benicia Detective Sergeant Badu, who found a 1966 address for Paul. First, Lynch and Russ checked out several bars in Benicia unsuccessfully. Then they went to the old address on D Street and talked with the landlady, who stated she had seen Paul a month earlier. She described the bartender as kinda plump with dark straight hair. At 8 p.m., she called Russ at the Vallejo PD and said she had made some calls and found out that Paul was in Yountsville, between Napa and Lake Berryessa. The detectives drove there immediately and spoke with Paul, who is now a boilermaker, at his home. I don't know any friends of Darlene's, he snapped. We just want to know where you were on July 4th. I was in a softball game with a team sponsored by the Napa Police Department. I like cops, he said curtly. The game started at 10:30 a.m., and when it was over, I came straight home. After supper, I attended a veterans firework display and was home by 7 and stayed there. Paul's new wife confirmed this. Lynch was very disappointed. One of his fellow detectives told me, the whole investigation originally seemed to focus on this guy. I mean, everybody was kind of after this Paul. Everybody was kind of after this Paul. The guy had even worked out at the Elks Club at Blue Rock Springs, but we checked it. That alibi was airtight. Lynch and Russ dejectedly went back to headquarters. Mike moved to a tiny second-floor apartment, his hideout, dyed his hair red, and was driven back and forth to the hospital by his father for treatment on his leg and disabled arm. Later, he would go to live with his mother and brother in Southern California. We felt, Carmela told me later with a chill to her voice, that Mike must have known who the killer was, because if I got shot, I don't know if I'd move out of town. Then we thought maybe she knew. Maybe she did. Lynch finally had to ask Mike why he was wearing so many sets of clothes. Lynch told me. He said that he was embarrassed by being so thin and wore extra sets of clothes to make himself look huskier. Not very comfortable on the 4th of July, I said. What of the missing door handle that was mysteriously replaced after the Corvair was in police custody? The implication was that the killer had to be a cop or someone close to the police in order to reattach the handle. Then I remembered that Russ's note to the police ID technicians read, "Dig inside the door area, handle area for bullets." The technicians may have done this, and when finished, automatically replaced the door handle, perhaps finding it under the front seat where the killer could have thrown it. Jack Molnax, the tough, broad-shouldered cop who would inherit the Farron case in the months ahead when it would become more than anyone had ever dreamed it would be, even tracked down Darlene's first husband in Santa Cruz and questioned him. "The guy's a little guy. I was thoroughly convinced that he was not the killer," he told me. Preston Lynch met with Linda to prepare a composite sketch of the man at the party. I sat there with the police, and the artist did the drawing from my directions. I spent hours with the police, she told me. Afterward, they gave me a long list of names, and I was to circle any names of people I saw at the party. They could account for everybody but the guy in the suit. After Terry's, I never saw him again. The envelope that arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle was postmarked in San Francisco and had two 16-cent Roosevelt stamps on it, placed vertically, one above the other. The letter inside, written in a small, cramped style that trailed off toward the right as it came to the bottom of the page, was cold and menacing. With the letter was 1/3 of a neatly printed cryptogram composed of strange symbols. It was a letter to the editor. In it, the writer took credit for the murders of David, Betty Lou, and Darlene.